Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Mullaney, former CTO and co-founder of NewsWhip. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to get started?
Sure. Where did I start? Let me think. I did electronic engineering in university, followed by a master's in management science, and then went and worked for a big corporate, in the form of Accenture, and spent a year and a half there. And at that point, the startup bug, which was always inside me, just had taken over. And, what age was I? Maybe 24 or 5, and decided, quit my big job, at the start of the biggest recession seen in 20 or 30 years, but sure. I was hoping to outlive it anyway. So then I went out to start my first startup, which is probably a startup that many people have thought of, which was a location-based deals platform. And we had some traction, but it's a very challenging market, and learned a lot of stuff. Kind of grew up quickly across those couple of years, and then I met Paul, who was the CEO and co-founder of NewsWhip, through some programs that we were involved in, and he'd been working in the news industry and had some ideas about how it was changing and how social media was changing it. And I thought it was just a really, really good idea, very exciting. So got involved, and the rest is kind of history. So for those that don't know, what did NewsWhip do? Well, what they do. Yeah. So, they measure where attention is spent online. And that's done by understanding what type of content people interact with on social networks. So we cover all the major social networks, and, that is how a lot of content is spread, and particularly, stuff that you describe as viral, which has all sorts of different types of content can be viral, but there are attributes to them. And so, the amount of information being created is huge, and the amount of people interacting with it is even a lot bigger. And people who want to be right up on the cusp of this need technology to assist them, as to what's going on. So that, say, publications would be able to find content before it becomes a story through its sharing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Different geographies, different vectors of interest, publications watching different beats and seeing how things work. So yeah, there's many different ways that people can use it. But it's generally to keep informed with what people are engaging with, and often to try and understand why are they engaging with that content. And with the way, so much focus is on fake news nowadays, what arena, or how does that sit in the NewsWhip area? Oh, it's actually a big part of what we do now. Paul said on Bloomberg that a lie can get itself around the world way faster than the truth can get its boots on, or something like that. It's an expression, and he was talking about the impact of fake news, and it's particularly in virality as well, because things that are sensational are often naturally viral. And so then things that are sensational happen all the time. But the question is, are they true? Well, that's the other thing, is that most truth has nuance. Oh my. Yeah. Yeah. So we can go right into Pandora's box here. Yeah. I've done a lot of work, and NewsWhip is involved in a project called Provenance, which was backed by the European Union, which was a consortium of companies trying to work against this issue. But even fundamentally, if you think about it, truth in many ways is a perception, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but one person's truth is another person's lie. And with a lot of the kind of debates we see online now, some things can be stated scientifically, like the world is round, but other things can be stated in other belief structures or whatever, and that's somewhat it's acceptable once you define within what context you're referring to the piece of information you're talking about. But most people don't do that, and hence you get a lot of conflict, and you see that all over the place.
That's it. So, there's a difference between the different brain chemicals that get us hooked on different types of media.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you've got your dopamine from your likes, but then you've also got the oxytocin from the connections.
Yes.
So are you able to see anything through the different types of content of what, are you able to categorize what types of content trigger which?
We wouldn't go to that level of physiology. Though, I mean, we've read a lot of, I'm a big fan of psychology, and, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know enough about exactly the chemicals to our psychology, but I know there is relations to that. We would say that generally content that goes viral has an emotional vector. So it invokes a reaction that causes you to act. And this is also the basis for my next startup, which is that I have noticed if you want to get somebody to do something, you generally will look to invoke a reaction. And you'll see this with marketers all the time. Some level of stimulant like happiness or, laughing or anger or disgust, all these types of things you can see that people with content, and they become incredibly vocal around this because it has given them that reaction.
So when you started, your background, it was more in which sphere? Was it more in the machine learning, more in the ops, or?
God, I was probably really just a generalist. If I'm honest, I started with NewsWhip. I guess I was always just a bit of a hacker. I tried a lot of different things. The previous startup, while it ended up in the deal space, it had a few pivots. We had built loads of kind of weird things in college. I tried to build an equivalent of WhatsApp at one point. I was always kind of fiddling around, and I love tech. And that was great because at that era, I think that was probably all you needed. Well, for what I was doing, I was lucky as well that I got a very good degree in the form of electronic engineering, which is a lot of the maths for machine learning. And as I've kind of, grown in my development over the years, I've gravitated towards that discipline again.
Okay. What was the hardest skill set that you think that you didn't really have when you got started? Because nobody's ready for it.
No, you're never ready for it. You just got to jump in. Well, one of the hardest things is knowing what you're not good at, actually. So in that way, that question kind of is applicable to itself. And there's always, obviously, when you start up a company in the beginning, you just have to do everything, right? Literally everything. And that kind of becomes ingrained with you. And it's a great mantra to have, because for your own personal development, you end up learning a lot of stuff. You could be a tech guy, but you might end up learning about strategy, or you could learn about organizations or psychology through your organizations and otherwise. But then also you gotta, particularly as the company starts growing a little bit, you gotta know where you're not good, because there are people out there who are way better than you. And it's important for the company that's recognized and delegated, for the best people to be given the job, but also to be allowed to grow the organization, because obviously one person can't do everything, particularly as it continues to grow. So I think the most important thing for founders is just that story of continual growth and a degree of self-awareness where you realize, right, yes, at a certain point in time, I had to do everything in this business, and now I have to do the exact opposite, which is like literally kind of be very particular about what I do and make sure that all the other people feel comfortable doing everything else.
So how long were you the CTO?
About 7 years.
7.
Yeah.
And why did you step away, if I can ask?
Well, it's funny, you start up a company and then all of a sudden, I think I'm a founder at the end of the day. Like, I love that unstructured kind of freedom.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm probably unemployable in that regard. And all of a sudden I was employed by my own organization, and I still loved it. I was still very involved, and I love the tech side. I love what we do. I love the impact of it. And, I still represent NewsWhip. I'm still involved with the business, but I'm not operationally involved. And so I just guess it was time for personal change.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, I was very lucky in that I was able to leave.
Yeah.
Most tech co-founders, if I look at the history of me throughout NewsWhip, for the majority of the history, I couldn't have left.
Yeah.
I mean, the consequences just would have been unimaginable.
Yeah.
But by this point, we nice revenue with customers, with great technology team, great head of engineering, great product team, and they were doing a great job. And I was able to leave, so it was a massive compliment, really.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What do you think the hardest bits in the early days were for you?
I say this all the time. I think the hardest thing about being a founder is that the first 6 months is the hardest. It's probably like trying to join some like elite military group or something like that, in that the entire world is against you. Like everything, you're coming from a real structured environment, like where you used to work, and people, everything was fairly planned, everything from your income to what you were supposed to do. And now all of a sudden you're in a scenario where it's just like, you do whatever the hell you want. But obviously it's really challenging in the beginning, because you don't have any reputation, or you might have an idea, but you may have experience in the tech side, but you may not have experience in any of the other things that you need. And, you really have to ramp up quickly, but it's kind of a psychological game, I think, in that it's a long journey, and you've got to remain really positive. And, it's hard. That, like 6 months in, 9 months in, you're kind of going, Jesus, I'll just take my job back and earn some money and like be able to talk to some people I work with, rather than like just be lost. Be lost for years.
Yeah, it's I can definitely relate. I mean, that's I knew it would be hard, but the difficulties are nothing that you expect them to be.
Yeah.
I thought, figuring out hard technical problems, those are some of the easiest things to solve.
Yeah.
It may take some time, but figuring out how to move faster, how to make sure that the most value can be created, keeping your sanity.
Oh, that I think is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I remember I was pretty young, and I just remember thinking, weird thoughts will enter your head. I was like, what will my girlfriend think? Like, she's going to dump me now I don't have a job? And I'm like, what type of question is that?
Yeah. And regardless of how much evidence to the contrary, so often you feel like, well, at least I have, like a loser. Mm. It's like I'm not accomplishing any of the things that I think I should be, even though the evidence is showing consistent improvement. But you still just have such a high expectation, and because you have such limited resources, everything takes even longer than the longest you think it's going to take.
Yeah. An uncle of mine who was successful in business, and we were talking, and I remember he said, he goes, get your timelines and multiply them by 4, get your cost line and multiply it by 4 as well. And he was right, except we didn't even succeed. So that's kind of the journey, really, is, I had a business plan, multiply the time and cost by 4, and then it fails. And that, I think that is probably the realistic outcome for your first journey as an entrepreneur. And if you get otherwise, I would count it as luck.
Yeah.
Not luck. I think you could have done great work and you deserved it. But statistically speaking, you're in the minority.
Yeah.
And so, I often say as well with founders, is like, I thought I was fine with failure. And well, I wasn't really fine with it until I actually went through it, which was like to put 3 years of your life and all of your savings into a business and then to turn around and say, it's failed. And to just, I actually gave my first business away to a guy at an event.
Wow.
Yeah, actually not the business. I kept the business open for tax reasons, but the website and all the brand and everything. And he goes, oh yeah, you were those Easy Deals guys. And I was like, he's like, yeah, you guys doing, this was back when the deals were still kind of going. You guys are doing all right. You're getting quite a lot of traffic. I was like, yeah, but we just couldn't get any money out of it. And he's like, God, yeah. I was like, do you want it? He's like, I'd love it. I'm like, okay, you can take it. I just gave it to him.
Wow. I'm really glad we're not to that stage. No, everything still looks good for us, but yeah, I mean, it's still hard.
That's accepting failure, I think.
Every day of grinding and grinding and grinding and keeping that mental attitude of understanding that it's going to suck until it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's loads of mantras I used to say to myself, and the number one thing I think in business is it is all around perseverance. That being said, there is a caveat to that, is that you do need to know when to move along. But for the most part, it's just an absolute battle of a marathon. And you really have to keep, I think I just became blindly ignorant. I used to describe myself as a virus. I'm like, I'm just not going away. I'm just never leaving. I'm just here. I'm just like, you're going to have to remove me with bleach.
I love it. Yeah, like you said with the luck thing, every bit of success has some element of luck because there's timing. So even if you do everything exactly right and your timing is off, you could still fail. You know, I mean, Facebook 2 years earlier or 5 years later wouldn't be Facebook.
Timing is very important. It's one of the most important things. And like, there's a founder's dilemma, which is like, I know. So if I have an idea and I think the timing's right, it's probably 5 or 10 years too early. And so and that's what I noticed in my first startup. And even with NewsWhip, surprisingly, I was like, Paul told me this and I'm like, God, this has to be done. I mean, this is too obvious, you know? And, no. And actually we were probably, certainly for the direction we took in the end, we were probably about 2 or 3 years too early.
Wow.
Yeah. That being said, it's hard to know if another competitor would have knuckled in. I mean, it's hindsight's 2020, but, and now, you know, that's why I really always keep myself in check. I'm on the third one now and I'm like, you know, I always think it's too early. I'm like, this is have to happen, you know, like, but that's another thing I think as well, is that if the customers are really saying it to you and you're getting a lot of customers saying, oh no, this is exactly where we think things should be going about now, that's a much better read. And when you start out in the first time, I think, I was one of these people, I just had low confidence in this arena. And so the idea of asking someone on LinkedIn to come and meet me and to ask them loads of questions about an idea I was concocting, was really kind of beyond my level at the time, you know, whereas now I like love it.
Yeah.
You know, but for whatever reason, there's a lot of encouragement now for founders to go out, and I 100% back all that encouragement. Back when I started, there wasn't really, I'd never heard of the lean startup model, and, you know, there wasn't really incubators or anything. So it was just, everyone kind of thought you had like a great idea. And then one day you woke up and like running a massive business.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's getting a little bit tired now, but the overnight success only takes 5 to 10 years.
It's rubbish. It's rubbish as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure there are stories. Actually, speaking of psychology, there is actually a very well studied area of psychology that talks about how people often who work really hard do associate it to luck, because it makes other people feel better, right? You know, oh no, it's just a really good idea and all this. And it's like, oh yeah, but you forget to mention you're top of your class and 15 and then 18 and then, you know, blah, 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 worked really, really hard and got lucky, you know, a little bit of luck. But I don't think I've come across any exception where I think you need the luck as well. But I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had to battle through it really hard. It's really, really hard. There's no words. My brother's starting a company now as well, and he's 10 years younger than me. And, I was telling him, like, it's just so hard. And he's excited and loves it. And he's in Techstars now, which is great. And he rings me up and he's like, oh my God, I just never could imagine it would be this hard. And I'm like, you're pre-revenue, pre-product. Yeah. And it's like I think before the revenue days, and I know that was like, I was an entrepreneur pre-revenue probably for like 5 or 6 years. Like, what? It's a long time.
Yeah, I know. It's I don't understand how to articulate just how hard it is. I mean, it's just that there aren't words for it. You can hear it, and it's like hearing about one of the special forces. Like the Navy SEALs. Hearing about their Hell Week, about being up for an entire week, basically. And that sounds ridiculously hard, but I'm sure if you were in it, it would be even harder than you could possibly imagine. And that's what this is like.
Yeah. I mean, I say it to anyone and this is what I think happens in the first year. Like, anybody who isn't really partially nuts, to be honest with you. I think there's an element of craziness involved. And that's why a lot of founders are kind of very entertaining and interesting people. I love them. Yeah. But they probably are, on an average of society, a little bit bonkers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I always say to someone when they get involved in startup, the first thing I say, it is financial insanity. Like, no numbers, no way there's actually no way you can actually justify this with anything than just raw passion. Yeah. And that's what'll get you through it.
Yeah. One thing though that I have realized, regardless of how it turns out, the growth that I've had professionally is just, I can't imagine that a doctorate in technology and business would put me in the position that the last 2 years have.
There's no way. And this is part of the problem, is that, we go into education systems and learn this and regurgitate that. And then I think we're training people to be very much, told what to do. And maybe that works for a majority of society. But, the reality is that a lot of the world doesn't work in a predictable manner, particularly like in engineering, or you're solving new problems. These things will, in which case you've got to go at a different way of, like, no one's going to be able to tell you the answer. You can't get it on Google. You can't read it in a textbook. You're going to just have to figure it out yourself. And, once you kind of get used to that, you just get addicted to it. I can't imagine operating in any other way. I would feel suffocated. In fact, that's possibly what was happening a little bit in my own organization.
I can imagine.
Because you do have customers and you do have products and you do have to support them. And all I want to do is, like, I don't know, crack some other crazy thing.
So what are you working on now?
So now I'm looking, it's not too far away from where my expertise is. I think that's always a good thing. So I'm looking at how news impacts the stock market. And there's a lot of, you talk to any trader and they'll tell you, it's hugely impactful, but we're really looking to try and build technology that will give financial, people an advantage. And it's kind of a similar problem to what NewsWhip solves, which is like, you just this ever increasing masses of information, and those information is important for your job. You're a journalist, or you're a PR person, or you're a brand person, and you've got to understand, does this present an opportunity or a threat? And in the case of finance, it's actually amplified quite substantially, which is, things happen all the time to companies, the market reacts. It's kind of crazy. And it reacts in a reasonably predictable way. And so, can we get a form of intelligence throughout the systems to try and assist people with the decision making around that?
Cool. Looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Yeah, me too.
And hopefully by then I'll have some money to invest in.
God, yeah.
Still early days for us.
Yeah, God, yeah. Well, it's the startup route. It doesn't. Yeah, if you wanted to just make a whole pile of money, you probably, there's easier ways to do it.
Yeah, there must be.
But I don't think they'd be as fun. I think
guaranteed not. Guaranteed not.
And you probably wouldn't learn as much either. And there's other things. I mean, it's part of the mantra now that I'm taking with the new startup, but we had it in NewsWhip all the time, which is like, we're going to enjoy the ride. It's bloody tough, but it's, we can have fun and we can have fun together. And you know what, then that's what a company then becomes, which is a bunch of like-minded people who love the work they do, who like being around each other, who, obviously there's tough times and stuff, but and that's a really enjoyable thing to be part of,
Yeah, I'm so lucky that I happen to have a team that's formed around us that is so good-natured, good, intelligent, and just, right attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, part of our culture is to make sure that we foster that, but so lucky to have the people that we work with.
Yeah.
And it makes the pains not as painful.
I used to say, so there's two parts to a startup. There's a part of the start when you're nothing. And that's just pure perseverance. It's like literally hacking through the mangroves like the SAS guys. And then there's the next part where it's like you start actually getting a bit of success. This is probably where you guys are at. And then you're kind of like almost afraid to lose it because you're still making hugely consequential decisions every single day. It could be, do we build this into our product? Do we take this money from these people? Do we sell to these people? And they could be incredibly consequential. And all of a sudden you've something to lose, something potentially to lose. And I remember that nearly I found tougher at some parts as well, which was like the fear that you could have hacked your way through all this crap and then screwed it up.
Yeah.
And that was where I used to fall back to, worst case scenario. And this is often a good way of just bringing yourself a bit of inner peace. Cause at the end of the day, I was surrounded by really good people. So I don't think I would have been capable of doing that. And I don't think we would have been capable of doing that. Thank God. But I used to say to myself, well, look, if it all went, I always used to say to the guys in NewsWhip, that if you come and work for this company, my commitment is to ensure that you progress as a person and that you leave in a better state than you came. And hopefully that you've had a good time while you're here. And I always thought, if I've achieved that and the company doesn't work out, I can walk away with my head high. Everyone's done well out of the company and people have had a good time. And you know what? That's all we really need.
That's fantastic right there. Absolutely fantastic. So into a little bit more of the tactical. What were some of the tools or techniques that you used in building NewsWhip that you think are your secret advantage?
Wow. Yeah. Again, you're always learning. I think the one thing I'll never stop learning about is learning about people. And, that's probably interesting for a tech guy, but the computers are actually pretty easy. I don't mean that in a bad way, but people are complicated and that's why they're interesting. You don't press a button and they turn on, people have good days, they have bad days. Teams get motivated by different things. And so understanding that, is one of the key things. I think there's a lot of forgiveness in this world if you can figure out how to work well with people and just even level with them. So always listening, always assuming that people have their best intention. I used to always assume that if there was any sort of problem going on, I would always assume that we were in the wrong first. That's some systemic issue or some sort of misdirection or miscommunication. Because at the end of the day, all your employees, for the most part, are well-intended. Mm-hmm. I've very rarely seen badly intended employees, and that's just because they've had a couple of bad days or something. Yeah. I don't think I've ever met anybody in my professional career who's got a malicious intent. So when you start working with that, I think then you can kind of build up a different kind of fabric. So that's definitely key. God, when I think like all the hiring, team building, tech, I don't even know where to start.
Well, let's start with what you'll be doing in this new company that you would maybe not have considered.
Yeah.
At the beginning of NewsWhip.
Yeah. I think one of the things, and maybe this is with the luxury of experience, is that I'm going about it in a much more enjoyable manner as far as I'm concerned, which means I'm taking it way slower and I'm being way more thoughtful about understanding exactly what it is we're trying to do. And really, I'm under no time pressure. And my co-founder is the same. We're under no time pressure. Obviously there is a physical limitation somewhere, but, that just makes it really easy. I think a lot of people, and I did it in my first startup. I actually did it so badly. I burnt myself out, which was just get and start working. Work yourself into the ground, write code. And, the amount of iterations and then like spit them out and then eventually end up handing the whole thing to a guy at a meeting. Right. Yeah. So, that's something that I'm a lot more thoughtful, like really get validation, get out there, meet as many people as possible and enjoy it. Like, you don't have to meet them in a boring place. You can meet them in a bar, or you can go out for dinner. And business is about people. And because of that, it can be really fun. So that's, what am I doing differently? I'm definitely being a lot more thoughtful, looking at the problem way more, talking to a lot more people, being slower about it. I probably have a bit more time now. When I was younger, I probably didn't have as much savings in order to go as long, but, just, I guess, doing the right things at the right time as best as possible. I know we'll get it wrong, but, I think before I just literally ran down the road for 10 miles and then realized let's go pretty much all the way back.
Wrong road. Yeah. That's one of the things we've been trying to work on within our team. So you've got the difference between your lead time, your cycle time, and your touch time. And so lead time being the time you identify something to do and when it's done. Cycle time being when you start it until it's done. Yeah. And then the touch time when each individual of the team is working on it. Yep. And each time it has to go back. So API work's done, start to implement it. Oh, wait, we forgot this endpoint and this one. Oh, wait, the UX has to change. So having a few more meetings, even though meetings don't feel like they're the right thing to do, it's still saving us time by doing it.
Oh, it sure is. I mean, what did Albert Einstein say? He said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes diagnosing a problem, 5 minutes saving the world. And, it's really true. And unfortunate. And this can be another paradigm that can be a little bit of a disadvantage in startups, which is we talked about very energized and intelligent people that work in startups. And I've noticed this a bit, but sometimes hiring those people and they want to get so involved, and it's great. And you've got all this insane passion, but what you got to be careful is like we have to be also kind of tactical about how we operate as a unit. And when we can't just start sprinting. And definitely, I think that's something that comes with experience, both as a founder, but also as an employee. I think the natural thing is to just like get really busy, be seen to be really busy, and outputting a lot of stuff, but not getting anything done.
Yeah. What came to mind when you said that? I've not even rowed before, like on a rowboat, but so crew is the sport. If you had the most athletic people in the world, but the cox caller is the person that sits at the front and tells people to row. And if you don't have those, and you've got the strongest people in the world against mediocre people that have one of those, the mediocre people are going to win. So I have no idea where that came from, but when you said that, that's what.
Yeah, or the angle, the other one is if you're off by 1 degree, or you're off by 5 degrees. So yeah, but it's just one of those things, trying to contain the passion and direct it. And I think that's another thing I've learned a lot about, and we learned in NewsWhip, which is how to get people together, but not only together, but in the same direction. And that's quite hard because you could have 10 people in a room and the same stuff is said, but not everybody understands it the same way. No. And this is why people are complex. They come from different places. A lot of the people that we were working or was working at NewsWhip, their English wasn't their first language. They were perfect English speakers, but there's nuances in the meanings, and I forget, some of the stuff that I say that's sort of Irishisms, that there's like this 20% of what I say is indecipherable. You know what it feels like.
Definitely.
So one of the mantras we're running with in the new company is is that trust is built from understanding, and understanding is built from communication. And that somewhere in this world, I think people thought it was offensive to over communicate, but no, we've said it's actually it's a desirable trait to over communicate and to ensure that the other person has fully got it. Because sometimes it's not until you actually bounce it back over and back once or twice do you realize, no, actually they haven't quite got it. Or sometimes you might even have understood it yourself. And this whole process builds up the understanding, but more importantly, it actually really builds up the relationship.
That's really good stuff. What else have you kind of picked up over time that you think, how about something actually technical this time?
Tech side.
That you really, you always want to have within the company and the team?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I spent a lot of my time looking at the human side, and, let me think. I mean, one of the things I looked for a lot was problem solving, and I think that's quite challenging. Also, dealing with crisis. I think if you're a technology leader, crisis is just the norm. And so it's what you really need to look at is like what percentage of time is crisis. Now, I wouldn't regard all of this as crisis, but when the engineers come running up to you screaming, we can call it a crisis, even though you're probably like, it's grand. It's happened like 100 times. It'll be fine. But there's, and that also comes with experience, which is just this like kind of logical check through of, right, how do we avert this with the least amount of impact? And everyone has servers that have gone down and God knows what. Fortunately, we never had really anything serious like data leaks or hacks or anything like that. They're the type of things that really, really worry me. A product going down for a period of time. I mean, in the early days, I was the only person writing the code. I remember when I was young, so I used to go out at the weekends. I remember flipping the servers. I used to have a remote login from my phone. And we had a problem. This was my previous company, and it was a problem that took me 2 years to figure out. It's another story as well. But every now and again, the servers would crash. It was because there was a caching clash when two HTTP requested the server at the same time. This was before they robusted or clouded a lot of this stuff. And when it did that, it created 2 threads, and then it left one idle, and it slowly but surely created a memory leak, which took about, depending on our traffic, it took about a month or 2 to bring the whole server down. But anyway, this thing used to haunt me. And of course, it would always be on a Friday night when you're out with your friends. So yeah, I'd be there logging in and flipping servers, like with way too much alcohol on board. But
that's something we'd have our Slack bot do now.
Yeah, exactly. We built auto things to restart it and stuff, and those things can go haywire as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's more like a methodology. It's more an approach to it. I think inherently just to love technology. I mean, I love it. We had a thing in NewsWhip, which was, it was a bit of a baptism of fire that I thought about it as I've left. I'm like, Jesus, it's kind of intimidating. But the first day you'd arrive in as a developer, you'd arrive in and all these pieces would be there. There'd be a CPU fan, there'd be a box, there'd be motherboard or whatever, just your whole computer. And the first thing you had to do was build your computer.
I'm terrible at hardware. Got big gorilla hands. So.
Really, yeah.
I don't have to leave that
I'm
day.
blown a few motherboards. Oh God, I remember my first co-founder, I built him a computer. I just couldn't stand people buying computers back then. I was like, oh, why would you buy a computer? It's such better value. So I built him a computer, and I made a mistake without knowing it. And but the computer worked fine. I made a mistake on the audio output to the box. I think I put it into the USB on the motherboard. I don't know what I did. I put it in the wrong place anyway. So the computer was working fine until he plugged in his headphones. And then, boom, the whole thing was gone. Motherboard burned to pieces. So yeah, and that's the kind of, it was, the thing is actually no one ever really had. We had one case where one poor guy, We got them. It was my fault, actually. I bought the wrong RAM, and we couldn't figure out what it was. But you know what? It's about having that. You know, you build your workbench. You know everything that you work in. You're confident in what you're working in. And if something goes wrong, we'll figure it out, and we'll figure it out as a team. And it was something I liked. Then also, you just got the hardware we had, the computers the teams had. I think a lot of them really, really liked their computers, but we actually never really had to replace them. I think I replaced 2 or 3 computers now. You know, just I'd buy close to top of spec at the time. You know, I think as I was leaving, I was on the Xeon quad cores. I did it, of course, for my own startup. I was like, right, what's the first thing I do? I have to build a computer. This thing's massive beast downstairs. I barely get it into WeWork, but 16 core. I can't even remember what I put in it now, but 16 cores and 64 gigs of RAM. The motherboard can go up to 1 terabyte. He said it was Joe Rogan for nerds, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, that's really cool. Oh gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. Should have written that down.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as I was saying, just the approach is just to get into whatever, you know. And personally, I'm a bit like that as well. I think it's the other side of, in founding, it's always been like, right, found a company and learn. But as I've gotten a little older, a lot of my hobbies have kind of fallen into this as well. So I build loudspeakers at home. I don't know. I'm always teching up my house. My house is just a bit ridiculous, to be honest with you. Like, it's obviously fully Alexa oriented and multi-room sound and God knows what. I don't know. I'm probably being spied on by every agency in the world, but
if I had time and money, I would have Arduinos and Raspberry Pis all over the place doing all sorts of nonsense.
I have a Pi at home waiting to get programmed, actually. Yeah, one of my channel switchers with a HDMI didn't connect with Alexa, so I'm like, yeah, I'll do this with an RF thing, but I haven't got around to it yet. So it's sitting there gathering dust like a lot of the other projects as well.
Oh, I remember what I was going to ask. So I know some companies' founders end up in a situation where they're no longer quite capable to remain in that as senior position. Was there ever a time where you thought you might need to bring in a CTO over top of you? Or
I think inevitably, if a company continues to scale, that will happen, you know, and I think you got to know when the right time is. I think also you got to know where your strengths are. And this is what I was referring to at the start, and also me leaving NewsWhip, which is the type of technical co-founder who starts a company, I think, is a highly, highly creative, bit crazy type of person. And then the type of person who goes to run an organization as it starts to scale is probably actually more methodical and predictable and maybe more human system orientated. And if the organization gets up to even bigger size like Google or somewhere like that, it becomes a totally different leadership play, which is probably more like Tony Robbins or something. And you definitely, I mean, you always want to pick the betterment of the company. And so you have to be aware of that. There may be a time where it's not. And I guess so that was both. I mean, for me, I would regard myself as an innovative, creative CTO, and that's where my heart is. I know the other stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of more passionate about this. And as the company became, you know, a medium-sized business, there's only so much money we could spend in innovation, and it comes more to supporting other products. And you got to start thinking about that transition as well. As you know, it's hard to get senior tech talent, and then there's a long handover. You know, like for us to onboard normal engineers is somewhere between 3 to 6 months. I mean, realistically, to getting them useful. But to onboard someone like a head of engineering, you're probably, I mean, to do it safely, you minimum a year, but I think you need 2 years. And I was always aware. I kind of look at it slightly different. More that I say you should delegate or you'll be a slave to yourself. And so you should just be constantly offloading all the stuff, and you'll notice that other people are just doing it better than you. And then you keep on going after what you're curious, and ultimately they'll kind of do the same. So, the thought certainly crossed my mind. I'm not sure if we could afford to hire a CTO over me at the previous time. No, I don't think we really needed to. But if we'd become, a 5,000 person organization, I have no experience doing that.
Yeah.
I would have been out of my depth. And I think you see a lot of founders that happens, and the smart ones, they make new roles for them. They chief scientist, or they'll always be on the board, and they will always be a leadership person. But operationally speaking, I mean, if you've got 5,000 people, you want an operational.
Yeah.
You want someone who's got 20 years operational experience. You just don't have that, right? And founders are generally generalists. They are, and that point where you move from generalist to delegating out that specific role that you used to do. Oh, I used to do the AWS infrastructure. Like, why would the CTO do that? Get the really shit hot DevOps guy to do it.
Yeah.
So and that's where the self-awareness is, and it can be challenging.
Just one of the ones I can't wait to replace myself on is payroll.
Oh God, yeah, I remember those. Oh, that's just bored to death. That stuff. Yeah.
I just feel it's completely that any kind of paperwork, I just feel completely out of my depth and just trapped.
I think
somebody's got to do it.
Oh yeah.
I'm happy to for now, but I can't wait to get rid of it.
There are some companies, I think, that offer very good prices on the services.
We've got some good services, but there's still a lot of
nickels.
Reconciliation and just so much paperwork.
I do. I remember those days. And again, at the general, I remember when we were doing our first VC rounds, and like I used to do investment models and everything, like certain different things. Obviously it would be a team effort, but you'd find yourself doing stuff that, you're just, all right, let's figure this out. And, then it's great. You hire a CFO, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, this is the model that I built. I really don't know if it makes any sense, but this is what we're supposed to do according to the investors. So I hope you like it.
So you mentioned the 4X your time and investment expectations. Do you have any other tips on how to estimate timings of development? Because that is something that I have never seen work well, and I am possibly the worst person in the world at seeing the results that I've got on the timings anyway.
Yeah. So, I do have some advice on this. It comes from, I think this is a strong point, but I'm kind of inherently lazy in some ways, which is like, I like to be able to balance my life, and when I was in college, I would always study earlier. I just never liked having to study past certain times and whatever. So it was the same with tech. I was working in an Accenture, and there's always deadline. Like they'd keep you working. It's not really their fault. It's the way the customer's demanding your time. And, they'd keep you there forever, unless you kind of pushed back. And that's one of the first things I think you do have to learn as a youngster as well, is push back a little bit. The other thing is, I realized I was like, wait, people are asking me for my timelines. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to bloody well kill myself. So I'm going to give an accurate timeline. I'm going to give a good degree of buffer, and I used to give what I'd regard as a ridiculous level of buffer, but it generally ended up being pretty accurate. And this is actually a psychological paradigm. This is why you've got a couple of Arduino boards possibly sitting around, or have a lot of unread books and a lot of other bits and bobs, which is that we are way more complacent with our time in the future. So, that's why I want to ask, will you come on holidays in 6 months' time? Yeah, sure, of course, no problem. I was really busy then. And so we tend to overpack this. And I used to be the engineers, we get that done in 2 weeks. And I'm like, all right, well, do you want to stay until 9 o'clock? If we don't, and I'd only be joking with them, because it's a very, very common thing, but I'd usually get rough estimates and just multiply them by 2. That's really not a bad way of going about it. And, kind of just be conscientious of yourself. Like most of it, work 8 hours a day, but you forget, actually, you spend 20 minutes on Slack, and you go get coffee and you have lunch, and, you talk to and then you're planning meeting, and then, there's a Christmas party, and then someone got sick, and there's actually not that much active time in the day. So, if you estimated it correctly at 8 hours, but you really work 4 or 5 hours, then doubling it would just meant your estimation was right in the first place.
So I guess my buffer should stop being realistic and should start being ridiculous, and then it will be more like realistic.
It will, and that also, then the problem that, again, a bit like the projects at home, and that's fine because it's all, but in business you want to be a bit more predictable. And so then what happens, and when, the years when I used to plan the roadmaps and stuff, I'd plan all the year. I'd try and get a rough estimate of how much developer time we had and try and really broad strokes get the big initiatives and, with a good degree of buffer. And all of a sudden you realize it's like, whoa, we got to make some really, really tight calls here. And when you take a look like that, it's much better because the natural reaction is to just say yes to everything or yes to a lot of stuff. I know nobody in tech says yes to everything, but everyone, oh, come on, can you build this? The customers want it. They really want it and they're going to pay for it. Oh God, you have to do it. And of course the natural thing is I want to keep them happy, but actually you could be just shooting your foot off. And so when you do a large thing like that and you go, oh, and all of a sudden you're kind of like, like, the project we said there's 3 projects we said we had to be done. We actually only have time for 2 of them. Like something critical's got to go. And that for me is real eye opening.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got some ideas I can do for myself, but I keep trying to, make better estimates of timing and road mapping, but it just never seems to. I don't know. That's not a skill I have. Yeah. Apparently.
I guess, and we used to do it on our teams as sprint. I initially did it in the high levels and then sprint planning, the guys that have to do it. But, but then to retrospectively go, right, well, what was my prediction and how far off was I and what was it that went wrong, and generally the larger ambiguous stuff that, where you just unearth a load of unknown stuff. That's usually the really ugly things that do. And you can never really predict that, so you're kind of looking for an average.
Yeah. It seems like every single thing we start to do, it's like, well, I mean, everything we do is solving a problem in a way nobody solved it before. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you should be getting something off the shelf instead of building it. I mean,
yeah, no, that's a big question as well. And that was something I used to think a lot about. It was like, well, what do we do specifically? And what are the things that we are willing to kind of go to the nth degree to cut ahead of the others, and then where are we just going to buy off the shelf? Because you can't innovate in every domain, and that's another founder's thing, which is like, I'm really guilty of this, and like rip up every rule book, just rip them all up, and it's like, no, we do need an org chart, Andrew, come on, like there needs to be a hierarchy of some sort. No. It's like, okay, you want to rewrite the rules of organization as well as like certain machine learning algorithms? And like, nah, stick to one thing.
If you could go back to yourself when you were starting, let's say the first company instead of NewsWhip, what would you say to do differently? If you can think of 1 or 2 specific things.
I mean, I kamikazed out of my first business.
Yeah.
And I kind of did it deliberately. Yeah. Like in many ways, I had this inherent kind of like, oh, it'll all kind of figure itself out in time. And, that's kind of possibly one of the better approaches. I think possibly I'd tell myself just to relax a bit more and not to have burned out the first time and maybe just to try and, I guess maybe enjoy it a little bit more, but it's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but just to try and lay off myself a little bit, because you can't really work yourself to the bone. But yeah, I remember I kamikazed out. I was like, I just kind of decided, all right, it was kind of coming to an end with the easy deals, and I had some savings left, and I was like, I have to find out whether this is going to work. I mean, just clearly the right thing to do is spend all of my money on a radio campaign. So I literally spent every last penny I had on a radio campaign. And I was like, well, then this was my logic at the time, was, well, then at least I'll know that I tried everything and it didn't work out. And that is ludicrous, by the way. That is just ludicrous. You can be way smarter than that. Like, while it did get me to the right place eventually, this is what I mean about just kind of going a little easier on myself, like just being a little bit smarter and kind of going, no, like 15 grand is, I think, is what I spent. It was my last money, would be kind of useful. And I remember when Paul came to me with the idea of NewsWhip, and I was just like literally come out of this spin that I'd done. And I was like, this is a fantastic idea. I really like this. And, you know, I was really excited by it. And I was like, there's only one thing, Paul. I literally don't have a €5. I'm like, I can't put any money into this. I can just about make it into work, I think. But you know what? The good thing is that, and I tell that story to people, and I say, you can actually start a business with nothing. Like, we had nothing. Paul was in a slightly better position, but not much. And we had about 6 weeks to get into an incubator, and we just about got in. And then we got just enough money, and we got going, and we got our first round then, I think, about 4 months after that.
Wow.
And then, yeah, we had no choice. Like, literally, we were both just broke.
Wow. All right. Well, that sounds like a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work.
I've been broke all the way through university. I was like, this is nothing new. In fact, my really short stint at working in an Accenture for a year and a half was my exception of when I'd had money. So really, I was going back to the norm, really.
Well, my genius idea was to take when the rental market is pretty much the highest it's ever been, and I've got 3 small kids, and that's when I should start a business.
Oh God, yeah, I know.
Yeah, entrepreneurship, mental illness,
madness,
pretty much the same thing.
Well, who was it that once said?
Not to disparage anybody with actual mental illness. Mental illness adjacent, maybe.
Well, someone said the difference between. And let me get this right. The difference between genius and madness is what?
Razor thin?
Profit. It's true, though.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So you're actually a genius. Just need the profit, and it'll all be there. My uncle set up his business with 5 young daughters. I think they were all under the age of 6 or 7. Yeah, I can't remember, but they were all very, very young. Yeah, this is the thing though. It's a calling. It's a calling inside. It's not a financial decision. It's just something you feel like you have to do.
Yeah.
It's it's an itch you have to scratch.
Yeah. I've got quite a number of businesses that I figured out how not to run them before we started this one. This is the first one that I've made a full-time thing, but a number of, nope, that's not going to work.
I mean, I say to myself, well, at least if I don't repeat a mistake, I should be okay. And that's a very good thing to live by, but you still probably will repeat mistakes, unfortunately.
Yeah. So many of them.
Yeah, I know. I don't even want to go there, but, if I think just staying, something I've said to my brother as well, which is something I thought about once, and I think there's an element of truth to it. It's like, if you keep applying yourself at anything, you'll eventually be successful. I'm like, think of a startup journey. Think about how many people cut out in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. I was like, it wasn't really till about year 6 in startups that I started getting anywhere with NewsWhip. And I think we were pre-revenue probably till year 4 or year 5. How many people have cut out by then? Right. And so like, if you think about, I think you can take that and bring it to the extreme. Like, let's say you're like a drummer on the side of the street and you're doing it for 10 years, 15 years, 20. Eventually you're going to become famous or something. Something's got to happen. Right. And the thing is just the sheer persistence. And when you think about it from the other way, which is how people perceive you, like investors and other people in the industry, you know, after a while, because they are always just tracking people's movements, particularly investors. All right. Yeah. You pitched me an idea 3 months ago, where you are now, 3 months, 6 months, right? After 2 years, there's nobody really left, right? So it's just kind of like, you're going to have to invest in somebody, aren't you? I still seem to be here. That virus, you just can't bleach off the step of your doorstep. So yeah, no, I think particularly if you apply yourself to the growth side, that success is inevitable, but it's very, very hard. It's very hard at times to get into that. You know, sometimes it's just, you want to cut out, you know, it's just, I just want to be able to go out with my friends and not have to flip a server in the middle of the night.
So is there anything that you'd like to say to the audience you'd like them to do? So especially, people who are starting their journey or about to start, want to be CTOs of startups or early stage co-founders.
I mean, it's funny. It's like another one I heard was, why would I work 40 hours a week and get paid $100,000 a year when I can work 80 hours a week and get paid nothing? And the thing about it is, I mean, if you inherently love what you're doing, it's not really a problem. And one of the things when I was in electronic engineering, we did a lot of coding, but the coding we did was like real, like C-level, like Arduino board level. And I just couldn't really see the application. I was going it's kind of cool, but I knew you'd have to have a big hardware company or something. And when I started learning Java, and I was like, whoa, you can just deploy this onto a mobile phone and you can deploy this onto a server. It just blew my mind. I was just like, holy crap, you can do anything with this. And, that's kind of where it all started in my master's. So it's like, if you're genuinely into something, and everybody's into things, you'll just kind of go, you doesn't feel like, and of course there'll be days when it's tough and things you're not interested, but, work for 80 hours for free and it just won't feel like it, and I actually don't advocate to work 80 hours. That's a joke more than anything else, because you need to keep your minds clear. You can make good decisions and, but just kind of follow your heart and stick at it. I mean, it is a long, long journey. Yeah. So go easy on yourself, because you need energy for year 2, year 3, yep. Which is, that's where I burnt out. And, thankfully I took a bit of a break and bounced back. And, but yeah, if you continue just following your passion, I think you'll end up in the right place eventually.
It's great stuff. And be the virus that no one can get.
Yeah, exactly. Be that. What's that one on your lip? Cold sore. Cold sore that every scientist in the world has tried to figure out how to kill, but just can't figure it out.
Startup herpes.
Yeah, God, you've got it.
Okay, how can people reach you?
They can get me on LinkedIn. I think it's probably the best way. So I'm Andrew Mullaney. Or if you put Andrew Mullaney NewsWhip, and I'm always happy to help people out. I really, really enjoy just, I help people, startups all the time, and people have helped me all the way. And that's how it goes. That's when I said in the early days, I didn't have the confidence to reach out. That was silly, because actually when you reach out to people, you will be amazed how much they will help you. They will nearly do anything for you. And that's because someone did it for them.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And I'll put the link to your LinkedIn in the show notes.
Great.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Great. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.